The air was thick with tension as I stood there, staring at the empty wooden box that once held my dreams. My heart pounded in my chest as the truth sank in. My savings, the money I had painstakingly worked for over the years, was gone. Gone. Just like that. The $7,000 I had saved up, a small fortune that was meant to carry me through college, was now vanished, and I was left in the wreckage of betrayal. I had built that money up from nothing: part-time jobs after school, cash gifts from relatives, holidays that were supposed to feel like celebrations, but now felt like reminders of what I'd lost. I confronted my mother, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Her response? She told me to suck it up, defend him, the man I had never trusted, the man who had been nothing but a shadow in my life, darkening everything in his path. He took it for the house, she said flatly, as if that explained everything. I could barely breathe. How could she defend him? How could she defend a man who had taken everything from me? My father had carved that box for me, my only possession of real meaning, and now it was empty. I was empty. The fight that erupted after was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was me versus them, but I was just a 17-year-old in their world, a world where they had power, control. My voice was drowned out, and in the end, I was forced to retreat to my room. I locked the door behind me and cried for hours. There was no escape from this. My hard-earned future had been stolen, and I didn't even know how to start again. But something snapped within me that night. I couldn't just let this slide. No, this wasn't just some petty theft, it was a violation. They couldn't get away with this. And so, I made a decision. One that would change everything. 3 days later, my revenge was swift. My mother and her fiancé, the ones who had thought they could walk all over me, were now paying for their actions. The law had come for them, and I didn't hesitate to make sure it happened. The aftermath, however, wasn't as satisfying as I had hoped. My grandparents, the ones who had always been on my side, were now furious with me. How could they turn on me like this? How could they side with them? It didn't make sense. But none of it made sense anymore. Not my mother's choices, not her blind defense of him. Rob, as I'll call him, had been a dark cloud in my life for the past 2 years, and I had despised him from the moment he first stepped into our world. His presence was toxic, suffocating. Verbally and emotionally abusive, he made every moment with him feel like a battle. He tore into my mother, then turned that venom toward me whenever he felt like it. His words cut deep, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. It only fueled his anger more, pushing him further into a rage. But I didn't care. At least, that's what I told myself. My mother never defended me. She never stood up for me, even when he was tearing into me, trying to break me down just as he had broken her. The worst part? She didn't seem to care. She had met him after my father passed away, and for the first few months, he was tolerable. But then, just like that, the mask fell. The manipulative, selfish person he truly was started to show. 6 months in, he was already using her, taking advantage of her. She, a woman who worked tirelessly as a floor supervisor at a local supermarket, wasn't exactly in a position to support a man who wanted a lifestyle he could never afford. And yet, somehow, she let him. She let him drain her dry, while he lived off his parents and anyone else foolish enough to support him. But none of this was my problem. I made sure of it. I worked, tirelessly, from the moment I turned 14, just to make sure I never had to rely on her for anything. Shelter. Food. That was all I needed from her. I never asked for anything extra, never expected anything. I had learned long ago that expecting anything more was a mistake. My mother had made it clear from day one that I wasn't wanted, that I was just a burden. As I grew older, that feeling became a certainty, and soon, it wasn't just a feeling, it was my reality. After my father passed away, I always wished he could have been there for me, to back me up when my mom's temper flared. But he wasn't, and from that point on, I was left to navigate everything on my own. The last few years have been a roller coaster, but when Rob came into the picture, things took a turn for the worse. Still, I clung to the hope that once I got into college, I could escape all of this madness. Now, that hope felt like a distant dream, slipping away before my very eyes. For 3 days, I stayed locked in my room, consumed by the suffocating weight of despair. What could I do? My money was gone. The one thing I'd worked tirelessly for, the savings that were supposed to give me a future, had been stolen from me. The worst part? I didn't even see it coming. The day after I found out, we moved into the new house. I did everything that needed to be done, but the silence between us all was deafening. I didn't speak to them, and they didn't seem to notice or care. On the third day, my mom dropped a bombshell. She told me I needed to get dressed for a housewarming party. The rage inside me flared like wildfire. How could she ask me to do that when I knew the truth? The house they had bought wasn't theirs. It was mine. My hard-earned money was the price they paid for that place. I yelled at her, my voice filled with years of pent-up frustration. The house wasn't a dream for us. It was a tool for them to flaunt. It was all about impressing others, making sure people knew they were successful. And the worst part? I had made their success possible. My mom, in her defense, just told me to suck it up. She said that now we finally had our own home and I needed to be happy for them. You owe us for life, she told me. For what? Raising me? That was something she was legally bound to do. No favors there. The house was too big for us anyway. It was clear to me that it wasn't about needing more space, it was about status. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't just let it go. Not now. That day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my paternal grandparents. After my dad died, they distanced themselves from us, unable to bear the pain of losing him. I hadn't spoken to them in years, but now, I needed them. I had hoped my maternal grandparents would stand up for me, but instead, they sided with my mom. They thought I should just be grateful. At least we have a place of our own, they said. That was it. They didn't care about the fact that I had been robbed. The money I'd saved for years didn't matter to them. I was alone in this, and I didn't understand why they couldn't see that. So, I called my dad's parents, desperate for any kind of support. When they picked up, I poured my heart out. I told them about everything, the money, the house, my plans for college, and how I didn't know what to do anymore. If Dad were still here, he would have helped me, I said, trying to make them understand. My grandfather was quiet for a moment. Then, he said something that floored me. Apparently, my dad had left a college fund for me. I couldn't believe it. All this time, I thought I was on my own, that I had to scrape by and work for everything I had. But it turned out my father had made arrangements for me, something I never knew about. My mom had never mentioned it. How could she keep something like this from me? I felt a wave of frustration hit me, mixing with the confusion and anger that had already taken root. I asked my grandparents if they had any proof of the fund, something I could use against my mom. They told me they would look for the documents and get back to me. For hours, I sat in my room, trying to piece everything together. It hit me like a ton of bricks. My mom and Rob had stolen my future. They'd taken my college fund to buy that house. The worst part was, I didn't even think my mom could afford that house on her own. How could she? But Rob, he was a different story. I didn't know the details, but I knew enough to put the pieces together. They had used my money to buy themselves the life they wanted. And now, I was left with nothing. For the past 3 months, Bob hadn't had a job. The idea that he had the financial means to buy a house like this seemed ludicrous to me. But what did I really know for sure? I needed something, anything, to confirm my suspicions. Once I had that, I'd take it straight to the authorities. I had waited long enough. Finally, after what seemed like hours, my grandparents contacted me. They had found the documents, photographs of the papers my mother had signed. It was there in black and white, the promise she had made to my father, that the money he left behind would go toward my college tuition and securing a future for me. I remember laughing out loud when I read it. She had signed it, but every step she'd taken since had shattered that promise. If anything, she had made my life far from comfortable. She'd gone out of her way to make it harder, in fact. I was furious, feeling betrayed by the one thing that should have been my safety net. How could she have done this? How could she have signed that agreement and then turned around and done the complete opposite? It made no sense. And yet, here I was, surrounded by people who had all abandoned me in one way or another. My father's side of the family had distanced themselves after his death, and though my mother's parents had tried to help, it felt like an act, always passive, always neutral. I confronted my grandparents about why they hadn't told me about these papers before. Their excuse? It was weak, almost insulting. They said they'd forgotten, that it slipped their minds as they got older. When my father passed, I was too young to understand. And after I grew older, they stopped speaking to us. I couldn't argue with age, so I let it slide. But now, with proof in hand, I was ready to do something. I contacted a friend whose father worked in law enforcement. I explained everything to him, how my mother and Rob had taken my future, my college savings. His father was more than willing to help. So, on that fateful night, just as the housewarming party was underway, my friend's father and another officer arrived with a lawyer in tow. They arrested my mother and her fiancé right there in front of the guests. And let me tell you, watching them being led away in handcuffs, that was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. The crowd, those people they had hoped to impress, stood in stunned silence as my mother and Rob were exposed for who they really were. Some of her old co-workers, friends, they looked at her with disgust. They had no idea what kind of person they had been supporting all these years. But what struck me was their arrogance. Even as they were arrested, they glared at me with contempt, as though I was the one in the wrong. How could they be so proud? My maternal grandparents were there too. When they saw their daughter being taken away in handcuffs, they didn't come to my defense. Instead, they were furious with me. After the party, they refused to speak to me. They claimed that I was ungrateful, that I had no right to send my mother to jail after everything she had done for me. I felt the weight of their disapproval, but I couldn't let it stop me. After all, wasn't this the truth? As the night wore on, everyone left. The house felt empty, cold, and oppressive. I was left alone with the echoes of what had just happened, but there was a hollow feeling deep inside me. Yes, they were arrested. But I knew they'd be out soon enough. Bail would get them released, and even if I pressed charges, it would take months before I could get my money back, if I ever could. The system was slow. The chance of them turning things around was high. And I was powerless to stop it. The house itself wasn't even mine. The deed was in my mother's and Rob's names. I couldn't force them to sell it. Even if I could fight it in court, the costs of a legal battle were daunting. But at least I had the support of my friend and his father, both of whom understood my pain and were determined to help me through this. The financial side was covered, but emotionally, I felt like I was losing the battle. To make matters worse, my maternal grandparents had turned their backs on me. They had no intention of supporting me, not after I had chosen to stand up against my mother. In their eyes, I had gone too far. They couldn't understand why I had taken this drastic step. So now, not only was I fighting my mother and Rob, but I was also fighting my own family. It stung deeply. I had fought for justice, but I had lost something far more precious, my family's trust. I felt like I had won, at least in the short term, but at what cost? My mother and Rob were facing consequences, but they would likely get off easy. And in the long run, what would this do to me? Was I truly victorious, or had I just set myself up for even greater loss? The uncertainty was overwhelming. I had no idea where to go from here. I couldn't see a way out. I was alone, and everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Maybe I had made the right choice, but it didn't feel like it. Beforehand, I had no other choice. As soon as they walked in, I walked out. They tried to stop me, to speak with me, but I was done. There was nothing left to say. So I just kept moving, walking as fast as I could, not looking back. I didn't want to face them, didn't want to hear whatever excuses they might have had. I called a cab for myself, and with a few words of finality, I was gone. No hesitation. I was done. For the last 3 days, I've been staying at my friend's house. The same friend whose father had helped me with the arrest, the lawyer, everything. Now, each day, the three of us, her father, the lawyer, and I, sit together. We go over the papers, over every single detail, trying to figure out how to resolve this nightmare. But the truth is, I'm desperate. I can't keep going like this. I need this to end. I can't let them drag this on forever. We've set up a meeting with their lawyer and the court-appointed mediator, hoping for some resolution in the next few days. I'll try to negotiate, but I won't settle for anything less than fairness. I need the money my father left for me, money that was supposed to ensure my education, my future. I needed to finish what I started. The worst part is, I don't know who to trust anymore. My friend's father has said I can rely on them for financial aid, but I feel awkward. I never wanted to be in this position. I never asked for this. And accepting help from anyone right now feels like a reminder of everything I've lost. My grandparents, they've stopped speaking to me altogether. I can't understand them anymore. After everything I've gone through, they just turned their backs. They sent me those photos of the documents, but after that, nothing. No offer of support, no compassion, nothing. When I went to collect the papers from them, they barely even acknowledged me. They wished me the best, but that was it. They didn't offer to let me in, to talk, to even try to understand. Just cold indifference. What happened to family? To love? I'm struggling. Honestly, my only hope right now is college. That's what's keeping me going. If I can just get through this, but I don't know how. My friends are the only ones who haven't abandoned me. And I'm holding on to them because they're all I have left. They're my lifeline. Then came the twist, the email. I couldn't believe it. I had blocked my mother everywhere. I thought I was done with her, done with all of them. But she reached out anyway. She created a new account just to get to me. And what she said? It shattered everything I thought I knew. She had the proof. And it made my blood run cold. My entire family, all of them, every single one, had conspired against me. They had all been in on it. The reason my grandparents acted so weird throughout this whole ordeal wasn't because they cared about me, it was because they were hiding their own guilt. They had all taken their cut of the money my father had left for me. They knew about the documents. They knew everything, but they kept silent. It explained so much. Why my maternal grandparents didn't care when I reported my mother. Why they always pretended to be concerned, but never stood by me when it counted. It wasn't because they didn't care, it was because they were complicit. And my father's parents? They never told me about the documents because they were in on it too. My mother had the emails to prove it. Emails from when I was just a teenager. And they were all too careless to delete them. They thought they were invincible. She even sent me the screenshots. She said, since you had me arrested, it's only fair that I drag all of them into this. If I'm going down, they're coming with me. And just like that, the truth hit me like a freight train. They had all been in it together. My dad's lawyer, my grandparents, my mom, they had planned to take everything for themselves. They wanted to bury the truth and use my inheritance to line their own pockets. I've been reading the email over and over, trying to comprehend the betrayal. How could they do this to me? My own family? It's all so unbelievable. The shock is overwhelming, and yet it makes sense. They've been hiding everything from me for years. The only reason my paternal grandparents told me about the documents now is because they suddenly had a change of heart. After I confronted them, they admitted they had planned to tell me sooner, but my mother and her parents convinced them to stay silent. They didn't want to get dragged into it. They didn't want to face the consequences. And now, here I am. Trapped in a web of lies, manipulated by everyone I trusted. I can't even trust my own family anymore. It's like I'm the last one standing in a house of cards, waiting for everything to fall down around me. They promised they wouldn't come to me and tell me everything, but that if I ever asked, they would finally come clean. And that's exactly what happened. My grandparents, the ones who seemed so distant and cold, had been in on it all along. They'd been hiding the truth from me, pretending to be concerned, but not actually standing up for me when I needed them the most. I should have known, right? It all started to click when I asked them if they could help, and instead of offering support, they handed over the documents. It felt like a slap in the face. Sure, they had their reasons, some misguided sense of guilt, but it doesn't excuse what they did. Their guilt was evident in the way they acted after the truth came out. They tried to play it off, but I could see it in their eyes. They were ashamed, and they should be. But right now, I can't even process it. My mind's a mess. I'm drowning in confusion. Betrayal, hurt, anger, it's all there, twisting in my chest, and I don't know where to put it all. How do you deal with emotions like that? How do you even begin to make sense of a world that feels like it's collapsing around you? I haven't told my friends about this yet. I couldn't. It's too much. This new piece of the puzzle? It's breaking me. But I know I'll have to talk to my lawyer. This isn't just another chapter in a messed up story, it's a game changer. My mother's email, the one where she confessed everything? It's explosive. I'm still trying to figure out how it all fits together. What was real and what was a lie? I'm learning the hard way that there's no one I can rely on. Not even the people I thought I could trust. No one except for maybe a handful of friends. As much as I want to shut down, I can't. I have to tell my friend. I have to get this out in the open. Once he knows, we'll tell his father, and from there, we'll figure out what comes next. One thing I know for sure, I'm going to college. No one can take that away from me. It's the only thing keeping me going right now, and I won't let them ruin that for me. I'm not asking anyone to pay my tuition, but I will ask for help. A co-signer on my loan, because that's the only option I've got left. And I'll take it. The meeting with the mediator today, well, it didn't go how I thought it would. My mother? She admitted everything. Everything. But she tried to justify it, claiming some of the money went toward my upbringing. She's delusional. She's trying to play the victim here, but it's not going to work. They took more than just money from me. They took my future, my peace of mind, my dreams, and now it's time for them to pay. I'm done with them. Done with all of it. This is my life, and they don't get to decide how it turns out. My lawyer and my friend's dad, they're furious, and I'm glad they are. They've promised me that they'll make sure I don't have to rely on anyone else for the rest of my life. They're angry because they know what this has done to me, and they're ready to go after everything that was stolen. All of it. I should have had a life of comfort after my dad passed. He made sure I was taken care of, but they couldn't leave that alone. They had to take it from me. It's disgusting. But here's the thing, they've made a mistake. My lawyer and I, we're going after them. No more sitting back. No more letting them have their way with my future. Things got intense today, but that was just the beginning. We've got another meeting coming up, and this time, my grandparents will be there. They've been part of this scheme from the start, and now they're going to face the consequences. There's a chance this will go to court. But until then, I'll figure out how to manage on my own. I'm taking out a student loan to get me through. I'll deal with it, but I will make sure I get what's rightfully mine. It's not just about justice, it's about getting back what was stolen from me. Every single penny. They promised my dad they'd protect me, but they failed. And now, they're going to pay.